This is video history from the J. Bay Jacobs Library for the History of Obstetrics and Gynecology at the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. It's a May afternoon in the year 2004, and my guest this afternoon is Dr. W. Benson Harer of San Bernardino, California. Ben, great to have you with us.
Thank you, Warren. It's a pleasure to be here and be part of the archives.
Well, we'll try and make you something a little more than the archives.
Okay.
You're, of course, happy to have you because you were a president of the college, but also happy to have you because of all the things you've done for the college and certainly for your long-standing interest and widespread reputation in Egyptian antiquities, which is something a little unusual in our field. Tell me where you were born. We'll begin at the beginning.
Okay. I was born at the hospital of the University of Pennsylvania here in Philadelphia, and went to high school in suburban Philadelphia, Upper Darby, and then to Princeton University, and then back to the University of Pennsylvania for medical school, and took my residency there at the hospital of the University of Pennsylvania where I was born. It seemed like sort of a symmetric thing to do.
What years were you at the University of Pennsylvania as a medical student?
I graduated in 1956.
So you began residency then?
And finished my residency in 1960. And I had my residency through a Air Force-sponsored program, and at that time they didn't have many positions within the Air Force, so I was stationed at the hospital of the University of Pennsylvania as a captain. When I finished, Uncle Sam said, "Go west, young man," and I ended up in San Bernardino, California.
You were sent to California by the Air Force?
Yes. I was the chief of the department at the 2796 USAF hospital.
That's in San Bernardino?
Yes. It no longer is, but it was then. And not only was I the chief, I was the department, with occasionally one or two general medical officers to assist me. So it was a very busy service. We usually did 30 to 50 deliveries a month, and I was literally on call every day. But it was a great experience, and I actually treasured the time.
How long a time was that? Did that pass through?
I was lucky and succeeded in staying there for the 4 years that I owed the service instead of being reassigned. And then that let me get an NIH special fellowship at the University of Colorado. And after 1 year, I left there because of a health problem with one of my children. I couldn't afford the luxury of academic medicine.
You were in Denver.
In Denver.
Denver, right.
And so I returned to San Bernardino just as the Air Force was making one of those seminal decisions where they decided, on the one hand, to close the hospital, and on the other, to double the size of the base to make it a major embarkation point for Vietnam. So I immediately could have a huge practice overnight with all the Champas military patients that I used to take care of.
They knew you and you knew them. Yes.
Exactly.
So San Bernardino it was.
And yes, we took root.
That was what year?
In 65.
65.
That's
so
when I returned.
Close to 40 years has passed since that time.
Indeed.
Tell me how you got settled and how the practice went over those years, and of course, how you became involved in ACOG.
Well, I was very fortunate when I went to town, starting out by myself, that a physician who had had a large practice in town passed away, and his associate was Alvin Russo. And Al convinced me that we should try practicing together, and we ended up being partners and fast friends
ever
from there on. It was, I think, a couple of the most important decisions you can make in your life are to marry the right woman, and then if you're going to have a partner in business, to make it the right partner. If you can make those two decisions, they will carry you through all sorts of bad things that could otherwise happen to you.
Well, I don't think bad things happen to you, but you've certainly carried through.
But how I got started in ACOG was kind of interesting because In 1975, I was the president-elect of our county medical society, and we had a malpractice crisis develop in California.
Nothing ever changes.
Right, except that we did succeed in getting a law put through which has now become the model that most of the rest of the nation wants. But at the time, the California ACOG was a section of District 8, and we were 1/15th of the district. But curiously, at that time, we had between 10 and 11% of all the fellows. And we could not get ACOG interested in the problems that we were having. So, in frustration, I and 4 others formed an organization called the California Association of Obstetricians and Gynecologists.
And we're in 1965?
And, well, no, now we're in 1976.
76, okay.
And we attracted quite a bit of attention, both within the state and also it attracted the attention of the ACOG leaders who realized that they had missed the boat. So as part of compensating for that, I was invited to join ACOG. I was a member, but to join the leadership. And we also started a program to get the California independent from District 8 so that we would have our own district.
You represented...
I represented...
About how many physicians?
About 800 or 900, I guess would be. Yes. And when we formed chapters, which were the precursors of the sections. And John Miller, who is long departed, bless his soul, decided the easy way to do it was to form 5 sections based on zip codes. So he took them according to number, with an equal number of fellows in each. So I ended up with a chapter, later section, which stretched from Long Beach to the Colorado River. It was 450 miles across. While at the same time, you could be, I had a portion of Los Angeles too, you could move across the street in Los Angeles and be in a different section. So it was really dysfunctional. Finally, after I ultimately ascended to become the district chair, I was able to hold a retreat, and we managed to restructure into logical geographic areas, and we now have the existing 8 sections.
What year did you become district chairman?
That was, you would ask me such a difficult question. 89.
89?
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
By that time, I was with ACOG, so
yes,
sure I got to follow all of this along as well.
Indeed.
And you had how many sections then when you restructured?
Well, we restructured. We went from 5 to 8. And also, one of my great things to do, I think, was to bring more women into leadership positions. We had, at the time that I finished as district chair, we had more women in leadership positions than all the other districts put together. And so I was very proud of that because it provided leadership, which I think was important from the evolution of the college.
It seems to have persisted up to the present, doesn't it? With
yes,
our incoming
yes.
president-elect of ACOG being a member of your district.
Yes, I'm very proud of what Vivian has done.
Were you then, with the state as your own geography, associated at all with Mexico, or for that matter, with Hawaii?
No. Interestingly enough, Hawaii has stayed part of District 8, and Mexico is part of District 7. So while it might have been logical, historically, that was the way it was lined up. And the Mexicans are taking over California, but we haven't done the reverse.
In broad terms, where are the obstetricians and gynecologists in California in terms of geographic distribution?
I think we follow a pattern that you find nationwide, that they tend to concentrate in the larger cities, and along the coast, the more desirable places to live are close to the ocean, and it does create some significant problems for us as you move inland in the area where actually I am practicing, and there are problems with access for patients there.
I'm sure when you get into the desert areas, there are fewer as in every place.
Absolutely.
Tell all of us about your career with ACOG. You were district chairman. This is 25 years ago now.
Yes.
What followed?
When I followed as stepped down as district chair, I felt I'd had a nice long run with ACOG, having gone through the chapters, and then as a section chair, and then as through the district chairs. And so I decided I would sort of retire from it all. But a year later, I found myself being sort of restless and deciding there were still things maybe that I'd like to see happen with the college. And so I ran for the national secretary position and was fortunate to win it.
What year now are we in?
So now we're going back 12 years ago. We are back in 92.
Okay.
And so I was the secretary for 2 3-year terms, and then again dropped out for a year, and then resurfaced as president-elect.
And that was in which year?
I was president-elect in 99, 2000, and president in 2000 to 2001. So I had the pleasure of being the millennial president.
Are there issues that you particularly remember from those years as president, of the years president-elect, that confounded you and confronted you?
Well, I was concerned about a number of things. I was concerned that the practice was going from where, when I started, everybody was a generalist, everybody was an oncologist, infertility expert, etc., because we didn't have that much expertise in the subspecialties. And as we have developed more and more information in these various areas, we have developed maternal fetal medicine and endocrinology and oncology. And I was concerned that these people might identify with other organizations more than our college. So I was very anxious that ACOG remain the umbrella organization. So I wanted us to carefully examine the representation and see that the people who are in those subgroups would be represented not by chance but also by deliberate process. So we restructured the board as a result of that. And I also had some concerns about how leadership developed within the college. So we had the programs to develop leaders and to help them and with mentoring and particularly promoting women leadership, because the fellows have to be able to look to the board and sort of see themselves.
Mm-hmm. How did in particular the programs for mentoring go? Or
it's always
identify an assigned leader.
No, I don't think you can assign that. I think you have to get the older leadership to realize that this is a worthwhile thing to do. If you just assign mentors, you get a few that would work, but I think it has to happen by the people finding themselves.
Well, obviously yours was a successful approach. I think we certainly have the woman leaders, but we certainly have the leaders in the subspecialties and specialty areas as well now.
I've been pleased by the results. The other thing that I was interested in also was expanding our outreach internationally. That most of our fellows didn't realize it, but at the time I was president, we represented actually 6 sovereign governments were part of the fellowship, because it really is American, not the United States of America, but American.
Okay.
And we had Canada and Mexico
as well.
And so it made sense for us to try to expand to give the benefits of all of our educational activities to those in Central America and South America. The programs there, I think, have been coming along very well and are very promising.
Well, that was an important step to take, particularly in terms of Central and South America.
Exactly.
Doing that.
And it's an area where a relatively small input on our part can have a disproportionately beneficial effect for the women in those nations.
You, of course, are also remembered to almost all of us by your expertise in, I guess, Egyptology would be a proper term, something for which you've been well known. And tell me where that interest came from and what all it's led to.
Actually, I trace it back to my schooling at the University of Pennsylvania Medical School and the hospital, which is right across the street from the University
Tell
Museum.
me how that works.
Well, when I was there, they were in a big construction program, and we had very little cafeteria facilities, and I discovered that I could run over to the museum, which was not that heavily utilized, and grab a hamburger at the snack bar. And they also didn't mind that you were eating in the museum, so I often, even though I only had 15 or 20 minutes, I went over, and I particularly liked the Egyptian galleries. And I think that planted the seed.
How did you follow through on this? Obviously, now you're an expert in the area, I think it's fair to say. How did all that grow?
I began collecting some Egyptian antiquities and actually tracked down a collection that had been at Drexel University here and was lost without provenance in 1914. And then I started going with expeditions in Egypt. And the first one that I went to was with Kent Weeks, who's now very famous with the Theban Mapping Project. I had the experience of being called out to deliver a baby the third night I'd been in Egypt. Yeah, and it was one of those experiences that sort of transformed your life. I saw Egypt in an entirely different way. This was a young woman who was possessed by a demon, meaning she had eclampsia.
Oh.
And it was in an area where there were 3 doctors taking care of about 65,000 people, and the doctor I was with had never delivered a baby. To make a long story short, we were lucky that the baby survived, and so did the mother, and I got a whole...
It helped you a lot.
So I've gone back to Egypt with an expedition almost every year since then.
What were the medical standards in Egypt at the times you were there? This is not all that long ago.
They were so appalling. They didn't even have midwives in the area where we were working. But the second year I went back, I took a little pocket Doppler and I gave it to the family doctor who had been with me. And that did more to change obstetrical care in that area because he had this marvelous little machine.
Could listen to the baby.
And the women who otherwise would never have seen a doctor wanted his little magic thing to hear the baby, and they started getting prenatal care. It was an amazing improvement.
What have your I know you've been certainly interested in Egyptian history. What have your contacts been with medicine in Egypt over these intervening 30 years or so?
Well, if we had more time, that has been very interesting because I've stayed friends with the doctor I originally went out to help deliver that baby. And I've also become acquainted with the hierarchy in OBGYN in Egypt. And they do have a number of interesting problems. They have greatly increased the number of physicians for their population, but particularly with female genital mutilation, that's an area of interest to us. And
is that prevalent in Egypt? Or?
Yes, at least 90% of the women. And it isn't as brutal as in the Sudan, but it still is not a nice thing. And so they're currently trying to overcome the cultural biases. They had outlawed it, and that only sort of drove it underground with terrible complications. So now they have sort of released that ban. What they're trying to do is induce a culturally satisfying technique where they just make a little prick of the foreskin, which will give a drop of blood and not cause any scarring or permanent damage, which will satisfy the cultural need, which then they hope to phase out over a few years. And so I hope they're successful at that.
Are you still at all consulting medically in Egypt? And
yes, it's sort of unavoidable when I go back to sort of the word is out that they've got this now, prominent
famous doctor
there. Yes, so I find that the guards and the cook and whoever all want me to come see their wives or their cousins or whatever, and they're all very nice people. Unfortunately, it's sort of limited what I can do to help them.
Tell us about the other half of this, that is your studies in Egyptology, your books, your collections, things of this nature.
That has been very gratifying. I have published, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 articles in Egyptology journals, and I was honored to be made an adjunct professor at California State University in the Department of Art, in Department of Humanities and Egyptology. And in fact, they honored me further by giving me an honorary degree, which was particularly flattering because the university had been in existence for 35 years, and I was the first one that they ever gave an honorary degree. So that was
you found somebody worthwhile.
And I give them, I give lectures periodically, and we built a museum there, which now houses our collection.
Now, is this in San Bernardino?
It's in San Bernardino.
Close by. Okay.
And that has been very, very gratifying.
On the campus?
It's on the campus, and since it's part of the curriculum for grade school, 6th grade, we have busloads of students coming in almost every day to visit there as part of their education, and that's been very, very satisfying.
Tell me more about that. That's part of the curriculum for the 6th grade. It sounds like somehow out of place in California.
But it's actually, I think it's nationwide, or at least it's statewide. And we have docents who have been trained so that they understand what the artifacts represent, and they can discuss everything. We have summer programs for students where they come and they can dig in the sand and practice being archaeologists. We also were very fortunate. The Getty Museum had restored the tomb of Queen Nefertari in Egypt, and to celebrate that, they built a mock-up of the entrance with 2 chambers, and they spent about $1 million. Well, no. They did it for the Getty Museum, but after they finished their exhibit, they had this sitting there, so I asked them for it, and they gave it to us. So we now have it on our campus, so the students who come can have the experience of what it would be like to go into a royal tomb.
Are there students who major in this as a subject?
Yes. They get the start there. We don't have the advanced studies, but then they will go on to the major universities that have departments of Egyptology.
It's more important to get them started.
Right? Yes, that and museum studies.
Do you have links as part of your interest in Egyptology with other universities?
Yes.
Since you mentioned the students moving on and up.
Very much so. And one of the fun things that I've done about 10 years ago, I was invited to speak at a symposium at the British Museum. And they asked the speakers if we'd like to see things that were in their storeroom that might be of interest. And I was very fortunate going through. They had a case that had mummy parts, and it had a little name on it, A.B. Granville. And somewhere the bell ran off in my name in my brain that was someone who had found an ovarian cancer. So I asked if that was the one, and they looked at me blankly. And I told them what little I could remember, and then we looked through, and sure enough, there was the ovarian tumor. So to make a long story short, we got the agreement that we would biopsy this and actually everything else there to do a study which hopefully will be published one of these days by the British Museum. And we found that the oldest known ovarian tumor actually wasn't a cancer. It was a serous cystadenoma. But that was great fun. And then I also helped Dr. John Nunn, who wrote the definitive book on ancient Egyptian medicine, and I helped him in preparing that, worked with every chapter with him, which was great fun.
I trust these things in Egyptology are likely to continue on at San Bernardino.
Yes, I think I'm so hooked that I'm not gonna let go. And so, as I hopefully gracefully transition out of clinical and administrative work in OBGYN, I'll be able to do a little bit more with the Egyptology.
What are your long-range plans at this point?
Well, I went from private practice into joining a group which provides the services at 2 county hospitals. And originally I was just going to work 2 or 3 days a week and sort of play the rest of the time. And then as things happened, I ended up operating a day. And then I ended up being chair of the department. And the last 5 years, I've been the medical director for the Riverside County Regional Medical Center, and I abandoned the chairmanship of the department, but I still didn't totally give up with clinical work because that's what got me into this in the first place.
I think it's interesting for all of us, even in the years ahead, to look at what you did in terms of restructuring California obstetrics and gynecology when it needed it, and certainly into helping to push us as far as we could along the line of the liability issues.
I think that, we got into the 20th century before it ended. No, I'm very proud of what the college has done. I think that our educational activities are unparalleled, and I'm glad that we've been able to use them as a model. Argentina has now set up a program using our materials and making them available to others through the web. Back to Egypt, the Egyptian doctors are all trained in English. Medical school in Egypt is totally in English. So they can access our website and get the latest information, although that is a little frustrating for them because they will read about equipment that they don't have and are not likely to get in the foreseeable future, but still, it is upgrading.
Well, of course, Ben, the reason that the college is moving along well is because of leaders such as yourself who carried us out of things that were behind their times and into